I've seen video after video lately about how self-help is ruining your life and is essentially the worst thing since the plague. Tons and tons of reading-related videos essentially just talking about the detriment of self-help and why it's wasting all of your time and getting you no results. And I don't know why, but I felt like being a bit of a contrarian today. So I'm going to try to disagree with some of the points brought up in these videos and kind of put forward my own argument as to why self-help reading isn't actually that bad, and there is actually something that you can get out of it, but it's probably not what you think. I want to explain why reading self-help books isn't a complete waste of your time. But I do recommend you stick till the end, because at the end, I am going to be talking about some problems with reading self-help and some things that you might want to avoid when exploring this genre of books. And to preface, I want to say I definitely have a bit of a love-hate relationship with self-help, the self-help genre as a whole, as well as the books. Because in the past, I was in a phase of my life when I was very interested in self-help, and I was essentially consuming this content and these books nonstop. I was reading the big hitting books like Atomic Habits and How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie that a lot of people hop onto when they first get started on their self-improvement journey. But what I realized was that I was reading books like this the wrong way. All the videos on the topic of self-help books are essentially going to tell you that you're not being as productive as you think when you're reading books like this. You're feeling productive, but you're not actually being productive because you're essentially just consuming. And if you don't put any of the information in the books to action, then essentially you're getting nothing out of it because all you're doing is consuming. You're not making use of the information you're learning. And I think this is 100% true. If you go into self-help and self-help books thinking that it's going to miraculously change your life and the way you think and how productive you are, then you're wrong. You're not going to get that out of a couple books. Even dozens of books, you probably won't become that much more productive. The thing with self-help books is that the progress we make, it tapers off after a while. So say you read some really major self-help books, like I said before, Atomic Habits, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, some really influential, very popular books. You might get a decent return out of reading books like this, but when you stack on dozens and dozens of extra self-help books on top of this, eventually you're going to see diminishing returns in how useful these books are for you. Once you've learned the essentials of communication or business or productivity or whatever else from a couple key books, there's no sense in stacking on more and more opinions on the topic into your brain. It doesn't really help you become more productive, and eventually you reach into the realm of feeling productive without actually learning anything new or without putting anything new into practice. So the main detriment of this kind of book I want to start with is diminishing returns. You cannot expect to become more productive solely from reading self-improvement books. You're not going to see a linear increase in how well you're doing in these different fields. And that's the argument that a lot of videos are going to make that I completely agree with. And with that out of the way, I want to explain why I think it still is good to read self-help books occasionally and why they're not really as bad as a lot of people make them out to be if you're reading them the correct way. And my first argument as to why it's okay to occasionally read some self-help books is that, first of all, they're just interesting. They're enjoyable to read. And I know a lot of people don't specifically think of this when they pick up a self-help book. They might think they're reading it because they want to change their life, they want to become more productive, better at studying, working, business, whatever else. But what people don't consider often is that sometimes these books are just interesting to read. If you take a book like How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, the essence of the book is trying to make you a better communicator. But along the way, there's tons of references to history, pop culture, business, different people who are very interesting to learn about, their lives, their histories, and how they achieve their fame and prestige. A lot of these books are just interesting in and of themselves, ignoring the actual life advice parts, and just looking at the information actually put into these books. Sometimes it can just be very enjoyable in its own right. And I think in the same way that we read fiction for enjoyment, I don't think there's anything wrong with reading nonfiction for enjoyment. Even if it's not a story, even if it's talking about the real world and real people, I think we can still take books like that and read them just for the sake of enjoyment, in the same way that we would read a fiction book. If you go into reading books like this and acknowledge that they're most likely not going to change your life in a couple days, they're not going to create insane study habits that you're suddenly going to adhere to for the rest of your life, if you can acknowledge that books like this might give you subtle advice that may be helpful, maybe not, but are still interesting and are still going to teach you different things about the world and just expand your knowledge about many different fields just to know and be interested by, then you're going to get a lot more out of these books than if you go into them expecting them to change your life, because they probably won't. And now another reason why I think you should read self-help books occasionally is because I think they can actually improve your logic and your debate skills. So in a lot of these books, you're going to hear a lot of points about how you can improve your life, and a lot of the information in these books are just going to be taken at face value. They're going to assume you agree with them, they're going to be taken as axiomatic, all the points they're going to assume you are just on board with. And sometimes you might not be, and that's okay. A lot of people go into these books assuming that whoever's writing it is the expert and that they can't have any different opinions from what the author is writing. And this is completely untrue. I've read several self-help books in the past, and I read a point and I thought to myself, this is stupid. This doesn't make any sense. Obviously, this is not true. Obviously, the author does not know what they're talking about, or they have a specific aspect of this point incorrect. And that's a great thing to be thinking about when reading books like this. If you go into these books without a degree of skepticism, then you're most likely just going to be absorbing a bunch of information and not analyzing it critically. For all we know, these authors could be wrong about several of their points, and it's your job to read books like this and determine for yourself if this is good advice or not. In the same way that someone from a specific political party may listen to news broadcasts or literature from an opposing party to get a view of their talking points and understand how they can debate these ideas, you can treat self-help books similarly. So you read these books and you're essentially just training your logic skills. You're looking at the points they're laying out in these books and you're thinking to yourself, what's wrong with these points? Can I disagree with any of these? And can I make a better argument, or can I make an alternative argument that might work better than whatever these authors are laying out? And now, reason 3 why you should read self-help books occasionally. I think occasionally, as long as you're not doing it too often, they are very, very good for motivation. Especially if you're in a rut and you're feeling unmotivated, maybe you're in a small depression, or you're just not feeling the drive to get up and go do things with your day. I think self-help can be super, super motivating for this. And depending on what it is you need to get done. So say you need to work on school, maybe you'd occasionally read a book about productive studying. Or say you want to work on your social skills, you might read a book on socializing and communication to just get you motivated to go out and do these things more. The problem lies in you reading the book and thinking that reading the book in itself is being productive and getting something done. Reading these books in and of themselves is never going to be productive. You're never going to be getting closer to your goal just by reading. You have to actually go out and take action towards whatever you want. But these books are still a great way to motivate you every now and then. And the key here is you don't want to be reading them too often. If you're reading a self-help book every week or two, then you're going to be wasting a lot of your time because there's no sense in repeatedly motivating yourself over and over again if you're not going out and taking action. If you were to read a self-help book, maybe every couple months when you're feeling a little bit low, when you're feeling unmotivated, just to get yourself up, moving again, and just excited to go out and do your work, that's fantastic. But it's similar to how you might go online and watch motivational videos. So in the same way that sitting on your couch and listening to David Goggins videos for hours is not productive, but it is motivating, self-help books can work very similarly. If every couple months you read a self-help book to get you excited to start working and do whatever you have to do, that's fantastic, but it doesn't make sense to repeatedly read them and think you're getting something done. So the 3 points I've made so far is that reading self-help books is good occasionally, but solely for the purpose of enjoyment, increasing your logic skills, and motivating yourself occasionally. Now that we've looked at some of the ways that books like this can be helpful or can be enjoyable, I want to talk about some pitfalls that you want to avoid when exploring this genre. And first things first, like I said, when you're reading books like this, you have to understand that you are not being productive by sitting there and reading. If you have a goal in mind, say you want to be better at your studies, you want to grow your business, or improve your social skills, your dating life, whatever else in life, if you want to improve in these areas, reading a book is not going to get you there. You cannot spend all your time on preparation and no time on execution. It's the equivalent of someone who wants to start a YouTube channel, and instead of making a video, they say to themselves, everything has to be perfect before I start. So I'm gonna make the perfect thumbnail, I'm gonna do research on the perfect descriptions and YouTube banner. They're essentially preparing just to take no action. In the same way that a lot of people will read self-help, think that the process of reading itself is productive, and they'll read, learn, and do nothing with the information, which is one major pitfall of this genre, and it's something I agree with that a lot of other videos on YouTube are talking about. You cannot constantly be preparing and not taking action because you're not getting anything done. It's entertainment, but it's not productive. And now another problem with this genre of books is that it can very, very easily create false expectations, especially when you're reading books about business and money, and you're hearing these success stories about people who went from $0 to $1 million in a couple weeks. And in the same way that social media apps like Instagram are unhealthy because they're showing you all these unrealistic expectations. For example, people with better physiques than you, people who are making more money than you. It's very similar with the self-help genre. So if you're constantly reading books about people who are doing better than you and they're offering you these quick hacks to get to where they got, it's very tempting to think that you're doing something wrong or that there's something fundamentally wrong with the way you're going about life. It's very easy to feel low self-esteem and even FOMO, fear of missing out, when learning about these people's success stories and what they're now doing with their lives. And I want to emphasize how important it is to not get distracted by the paths other people took. If you have your own goals, you have your own interests, there's no sense in reading tons and tons of books like this and getting demotivated because you see other people are finding success faster than you or in different realms than you. You want to focus on your interests and not get pulled in all these different directions. If you can't acknowledge that there are going to be people doing better than you with their social skills, dating, money, studying, whatever else, then I would recommend staying away from this genre, because you do have to do it mindfully. You have to acknowledge that you're not a bad person. You're not worthless because you don't have the same success as these people. Everyone has their own path, and there's no use in comparing yourself to the people writing these books and the people in these books. And one point that a lot of other videos bring up about why self-help isn't really useful to read and why you should be reading things like fiction instead is that when you're reading a fiction book, you do have to engage your mind and your creativity. So you're concocting these stories in your mind, you're thinking about what these characters might look like, the situations they're getting themselves into, and they sort of just make you better at thinking about complex situations and interactions between people, and they really just get your creative gears going in your brain, something that self-help books don't necessarily do. So if you're looking to become more creative and maybe better at thinking about complex scenarios like in these books, self-help probably isn't going to get you there. But again, for the sake of entertainment and hearing about different perspectives, I think books like this still do have some intrinsic value. So there's no sense in hating yourself for reading self-help books. If there's a best-selling book that you see at a thrift store and you've wanted to read it for a while and you pick it up, there's no problem with reading that. See what points they're making, enjoy it, treat it like what it is. A book that you're reading for fun that might teach you more about the world, might improve your logic skills a little bit, but understand that it's not going to change your life in a week. So if you can read self-improvement mindfully, understanding that books like this most likely won't be making any groundbreaking changes in your life, but are entertaining and still do make you think, then I would still encourage you to explore this genre. And let me know what you guys think in the comments. For all I know, I could be completely wrong. These are just my opinions. If you guys have opinions on self-help books versus things like fiction or whatever else, I'm very curious to see what you guys have to say about it. And if you want, you can tear the video to shreds. If you have a completely different opinion and you think that something I said is completely stupid, feel free to say it in the comments. I'm just curious to hear your guys' points. And now if you're still watching, then you probably have a really good attention span because this video has been pretty long. But I really appreciate you staying until the end. If you like videos like this on studying, productivity, reading, basically anything educational for college students, I really recommend you subscribe. There's going to be a whole lot more videos like this soon, but until then, I'll see you guys.